My name is Claire Bergman. I'm a social work student at Loyola and a board member of Loyola's School of Social Work Student Organization. Our organization is pleased to bring to you tonight the untold story of Ada S. McKinley, and we are elated to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Jerry Lee. Dr. Lee is an assistant professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at North Carolina State University. Previously, he was a faculty member in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism at the University of Missouri. He holds a PhD and master's degree from the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Sciences at Texas A&M University. Dr. Lee's scholarly activities have focused on the issues pertaining to social justice, diversity, racial discrimination, subjective well-being, and interracial interaction in the context of parks, recreation, tourism, and sport. His research and teaching have been recognized by 2020 Best Research Paper Award from the Academy of Leisure Sciences, the Golden Apple Award in Excellent Teaching and Mentorship at the University of Missouri, the U.S. Senator Phil Gramm Doctoral Fellowship, which is the highest recognition for doctoral students at Texas A&M, Diversity Scholarship from National Recreation and Park Association, and the Korean American Scholarship Foundation. So he's a very talented and wonderful young man, and we're very excited to have him here today. So Dr. Lee today will be presenting his research on Ada S. McKinley, a Black female social reformer who founded the Southside Settlement House in Chicago in the early 20th century. So I will now hand it over to Dr. Lee to begin his presentation.
Well, thank you so much for warming and welcoming message from Claire. Hi, everyone. My name is KangJae Jerry Lee. I go by Jerry. And this is such an honor, and I'm so excited to share my research activities with the audience from Loyola University Chicago and other social work programs in the Chicago area. And especially, I would like to thank Claire Bergman's effort to coordinate this event. This is such an honor, and I'm really thrilled to talk more about Ada S. McKinley. So let's get into it. Let me make sure that I share my PowerPoint. Okay, can everybody see my PowerPoint? Good, okay. Can you hear me okay? Just trying to making sure. Okay, good. All right, so Untold the story of Ada S. McKinley. Let's get into it. Today, I structured my presentation based on these three elements, I guess, contents. First of all, I would like to briefly mention who I am. I mean, Claire provided really nice introductions, but I think it's, I'm not from social work. As you can see, I'm from park and recreation. So providing more context information will be really nice for you to better understand why I do this type of research and how I end up doing this, investigation on Ada S. McKinley. So that was the first part. And the second part, I would like to focus on Ada S. McKinley, and I'm going to give you some information on, I guess, my research journey, how I got to know about Ada S. McKinley and what type of research I wanted to do, and how eventually I got this information published. And then finally, I'm going to briefly talk about future directions for this type of research. So, all right, who I am. So I was born in Korea, not North Korea. I'm not a friend with, a rocket man. I was born in Daegu, which is third largest city in South Korea. But when I was 5 years old, my family moved to Tokyo, Japan. So I lived there about 7 years, Shinjuku area. And after living in Shinjuku area for 7 years, my family moved back to Korea. And afterwards, that's where I graduated my middle school and high school, and I became a student of tourism and recreation program at KangJae University. And KangJae University is known for its oldest tourism and recreation program in the country. And it was I liked the major and I really enjoyed it. And after finishing my freshman year, I had an opportunity to visit California State University East Bay. I was selected as an exchange student from my college. And so it was my first time experiencing American culture and I guess educational environment, or maybe California culture to be specific. But I really like it. I enjoy it a lot, and I thought about staying there, but unfortunately, I had to finish my military service. So in Korea, if you are a healthy male, then you have to finish certain amount of military service. This is a duty as a Korean citizen. At that time, I had to do 2 years of military service. So I applied for Army, and then I applied for Korean augmentation to the United States Army. This is called KATUSA. And KATUSA soldiers are very unique because technically they are Republic of Korean Army, but they spend nearly 90% of their military life with American GI soldiers in Korean Peninsula. So I was assigned to Charlie Company 168 Medical Battalion, and I was a supply specialist. So that was my opportunity to, I guess, work with experienced U.S. Military culture as well. After 2 years of military service, I went back to my college and tried to finish my bachelor's degree. But during my senior year, I had this desire and hunger for knowledge. I felt that I didn't know much about my major or park or recreation or tourism. So I had a desire for furthering education. So I applied to many different graduate programs in the United States. And I got an admission from Texas A&M University. So in 2006, I moved to College Station, Texas to pursue my master. And in 2009, I finished my master and then went on to continue my education for PhD in recreation, park, and tourism sciences. And in 2013, I successfully finished my PhD. And then I got a job offer from University of Missouri as an assistant teaching professor. And I was there about 4 years. I really enjoyed my job as assistant teaching professor, but I also wanted to more actively engage in research. So in 2017, I got a job offer from NC State University, which was my dream job. And here I am. I have been at the Parks and Recreation Tourism Management Department at NC State for 4 years. And so that's basically the quick history of my research, I guess my life trajectory. When it comes to research, I have two distinctive research areas. One is sociology of leisure. So by training, I'm a sociologist, and I would like to see myself as a social and environmental justice researcher. And especially, I tended to focus on issues related to race and ethnicity in the context of public parks and outdoor recreation. Today, I'm going to talk about Ada McKinley, but another, I guess, well-known research of mine is African Americans' access to outdoor recreation sites, such as national parks and state parks and things like that. My second research area is social psychology of leisure. And in this particular line of inquiry, I tended to look at the relationship between leisure participation and subjective well-being. Because there are many studies showing that the positive correlations between leisure participation and life satisfaction. So more, you have enough leisure time, then people are more likely to be happy. But then, of course, there are some nuance to it, such as who you are participating in the leisure activity with and how frequently you are engaging in leisure activity and how much leisure repertoire you have. So I tried to tease out these complexities using many different statistical models. So those are the two major research programs. At this point, you are probably wondering what exactly Park and Recreation and Tourism Management Department do. This is because Park and Recreation departments are relatively, I would say, relatively new field of study. Mainly in the United States, these departments started much in 1970s. So it's a relatively young field, and researchers are coming from many different backgrounds. I work with professors trained in public health, environmental sciences, geography, and park and recreation department. So it's a very interdisciplinary field. And The reason why we study settlement house movement is because park and recreation movement and settlement house movement go hand in hand, which I'm going to explain in a minute. So I hope that provides nice contextual information and better understanding who I am and what type of research I do. So let's talk about Ada McKinley. So in this section, yeah, we are moving into the second component of today's presentation. And here I'm going to talk about, I guess, my research journey and how I got to know about her and why I decided to, investigate her more. And then I'm going to summarize my award-winning publication and basically present the gist of it. So everything started in 2017 when I attended the Canadian Congress of Leisure Research. And I was attending a presentation session provided by Dr. Rodney Deezer from the University of Northern Iowa. And his presentation was something about settlement house movements in the United States. Quite frankly, I'm sorry, Rod, but I didn't remember much of his presentation, except just one thing. Almost at the end of his presentation, he mentioned that there was an African-American social reformer called Ada McKinley, and she provided similar service that those of Jane Addams and Hull House offered. So that immediately intrigued my interest because, when I was a graduate student, I read many textbooks, articles in our field, and none of them mentioned Ada McKinley or any social workers of color, right? So after the presentation, I approached Dr. Deezer, introduced myself. We didn't know each other well. And I asked him to describe Ada McKinley. Can you tell me more about Ada McKinley, who she was and what she did? And unfortunately, Dr. Deezer didn't have much information about her. He just found out about Ada McKinley, so he didn't have much information. So at that point, I had a very strange, I guess, desire or professional obligation type of feeling that, I want to make sure that I know about this person, and I want to make sure that other people in my field know more about Ada McKinley. Because as I mentioned, existing textbooks, if you look at the major textbooks in our field, usually at the beginning, there is a section for the history of park and recreation. And usually those sections cover settlement house movements because of its connections with park and recreation. As I mentioned, settlement house movement and park and recreation movements are so intertwined. The idea of park and recreation movement is that if you don't spend your free time meaningfully and constructively, then you're more likely to be gravitated towards unhealthy and undesirable activities such as alcoholism, delinquencies, and crime activity. So the idea is that by constructing our free time and recreation times meaningfully, then we will become a productive member of the society. So it has a lot to do with character building. And settlement houses fully embraced this idea and provided many recreation programs to many different people. So that's why we cover settlement house movements. But then the existing, textbooks and narrative about settlement house movement, at least from my field, park and recreation, is dominated by white Americans' history. So I wanted to make sure that I know more about Ada McKinley, and if I have enough information, that I wanted to make sure that more people in my field become aware of her. So I say, Rod, I want to do this. I want to investigate Ada McKinley, and let's team up. And then my journey for this research project initiated. And in 2017, I started this research project. And after 1 or 2 months, I quickly noticed that there are surprisingly little information on McKinley. I was expecting there may be some writings or articles published in the field of history or social work, but that was not the case, only one or two pieces of information. So I had to contact several librarians in Illinois, and I had to contact librarians in my school and universities and ask them to provide any information, search and identify any any information related to Ada McKinley. I also contacted the Ada McKinley Community Service, which is the organization in Chicago area currently, and asked them to provide any information too. Any type of research requires some money. So I applied for 3 different research grants from 2017 and 2019, and all of them were rejected. I didn't get any money. So I was like, wow, great. Lack of information, lack of money, and lack of time. As an assistant professor, I had to demonstrate my research productivity. And historical investigation usually takes a lot of time. So in terms of research output and number of publications, it's not very efficient in my opinion. So it was not easy. I struggled a lot, and it was not easy process. But after 3 years, last year, I was able to accumulate just enough information to get a publication. So there was a conference, the Academy of Leisure Sciences Conference in 2020 at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And Rod and I presented our abstract. And then the presentation was really well received. And our presentation was nominated for the Best Research Paper Award. And so for that reason, Leisure Sciences, the best leisure journal, contacted us and asked us to submit a manuscript. And then we did. And we received really positive comments from reviewers. And then eventually the paper was published and it won the Best Research Paper Award in 2020. So Rod and I were like, yes, finally. 3 years of research and struggles finally paid off, And immediately after the publications and won the Best Research Paper Award, multiple journalists contacted me, and I started to notice that it was really the research activity and the article itself was really publicized among many different journalists. And then, our article was covered by the Chicago Tribune, and I also interviewed with multiple TV stations in the Chicago area. So what exactly I wrote? Let's talk about this publication. The title of this paper is Ada McKinley, A Hidden History of African-American Settlement House in Chicago. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to briefly summarize this paper. So the purpose of this paper is really providing a more balanced and nuanced understanding in the South settlement house movement in the United States. Because as I mentioned, existing research on the settlement house movements are usually dominated by heroification and celebration of wealthy white social reformers, such as Jane Addams. So our intention was to offer a counter narrative to this white-dominated history and perhaps cherry-pick the history of park and recreation profession. So to this end, we first provide biographical information on Ada McKinley. So who she was. She was actually born and raised in Galveston, Texas. She was born in she was born in Galveston, Texas in 1868, but the family moved to Corpus Christi, which is further south. Usually, it's usually a tourism destination in Texas. But she was born as Ada Sophia Dennison. She was the first child of Joseph and Alice Dennison. And Ada Sophia Dennison went to Prairie View Agricultural and Mechanical College and Prairie View campus. And currently this university is Texas A&M University Prairie View campus. And she also went to Tulsa Missionary College in San Antonio. And when she was at this missionary college, that was where she started to develop this strong desire for providing service to others. And that's where she started to notice a lot of social issues, and she wanted to really help these, sort of marginalized individuals. After she graduated the missionary college, she wanted to go to a missionary trip, which is, a normal course of trajectory. But her father didn't like the idea. He thought that she was too young for a long journey. So instead of going to a missionary trip, Ada McKinley focused on illiterate among African American in rural Texas. And she became English teachers in rural schools in Austin area. And that's when she met William Buchanan McKinley, a dentist from Tennessee. A couple married in 1887, and they had 3 kids, but unfortunately, all of their 3 kids died because of the pandemic. I don't exactly remember the name of the pandemic. It was very contagious. So couple lost all 3 kids. So it must be a really, really devastating event. But later on, family members recommended the couple to move to Chicago because they thought that William's opportunities will be better in a larger city. So it's not clear when exactly the couple moved to Chicago area, but the existing sources indicate that it was before 1900. So if you look at this, they are, McKinley couple was in the first wave of great migration in American history. The couple settled in Southside community, which is the home for a lot of Black migrants in the Chicago area. And in 1918, McKinley became a hostess position, serving the Work Camp Community Service. Work Camp Community Service was established by Chicago Urban League, WCCS. This is an organization that provides support for Black veterans and Black servant migrants. And in this organization, McKinley developed and was in charge of a recreation program called Soldiers and Sailors Club. And quickly, according to the existing resource, she earned a reputation that she is a woman with extraordinary ability. So I guess she was really good at, she had excellent people skills, and she was really good at what she was doing. But unfortunately, 2 years later, WCCS, the funding for this organization was terminated because World War I was over, and government funding to support this type of population was shrinking. But McKinley wanted to provide more service because she saw much need. A lot needs to be done in the Southside community. At that time, Southside community was one of the most dangerous and impoverished areas in Chicago. So she didn't want to stop. She wanted to serve the community. So McKinley somehow managed to maintain the building, and she established the Southside Community Service. And this is a picture of Southside Community Service, which is available from Chicago Commission on Race Relations, published in 1922. One of the interesting, most important, historical events when it comes to Ada McKinley is this one, the Chicago Race Riots in 1919. Chicago race riots in 1919 was one of the most devastating racial riots in the history of Chicago. During this turmoil, McKinley linked arms with other white social reformers such as Jane Addams, Mary McDowell, and Harriet Beeton. And they marched together in Chicago streets as a peace protest. And according to this publication from the Chicago Defender in 1955, she made this statement, quote, "We will show them that white and colored can get along sociably together." So she was a racial justice advocate. And she was also an advocate of women's right. And she was adamant of the voting right of women. So in terms of activities and her focus, it is very similar to those of Jane Addams. And then the fact that they marched together, and Jane Addams and these white, social reformers, they knew each other. And in fact, Southside Community Service, this is actually only 4 miles away from the whole house that Jane Addams established. But it's quite surprising that we talk a lot about Jane Addams when it comes to settlement house movement, but we don't really talk about Ada McKinley. So this is quite interesting to me. So going back to the history, in 1926, Southside Community Service was renamed to Southside Settlement House, and board members appointed McKinley as our head resident. And so because she is a head resident, she stayed in the building and she lived there with her husband and their fourth child, William McKinley Jr. And according to the existing resource, by 1927, Southside Settlement House had provided a wide range of, many different services for the local community, such as recreation activity. They had a festival, events, provided adult literary educations, public housing, and nursery. And it was really, really important service for this devastated community. And they served nearly 25,000 individuals. And according to research conducted by one of the students at Loyola University School of Social Work, it was the only settlement house fully staffed by African American, and it covered the largest area to provide a service in Chicago area, which is remarkable. In 1949, the settlement house was renamed as Ada McKinley Community Service to honor Ada McKinley's lifetime contribution to the Southside community. And in 1953, they had this ceremony of building a new, having a new building for the community service organization. And then the day that she attended this ceremony, unfortunately, she collapsed when she was, climbed the stairway in her house. And the cause of death was determined to be cerebral hemorrhage, which is the blood vessel clogging around the brain area. And it was age of 85. Despite of her death, her legacy is going strong. The Ada McKinley Community Service is the organization, it's one of the most largest human service organizations in the United States. And according to their statistics and information, it serves more than 7,000 individuals annually at over 70 locations. So it's really nice to see that her legacy is still with us and it still provides service to the Southside community and beyond. I think this is truly, truly meaningful and remarkable. So that was, I guess, sort of overview of McKinley's life. At this point, I would like to I would like to have a little bit of, I guess, explanations on McKinley's impact in Southside community and larger, broader settlement housing movement. And for that reason, I would like to make a quick comparative analysis between McKinley and Jane Addams. Comparing individuals is always controversial because they are two different individuals. You can't make an apple-to-apple comparison, right? But I guess the beauty of this type of comparative analysis is that by establishing, some sort of point of comparison, characteristics of these individuals become much, evident and clearer. So that's so for that reason, if you look at the left column, you see several different criteria that I established, such as background, recognitions, philanthropical support, and activity legacy of these individuals. If you, and you can see some brief summaries of these different, criteria. One of the most distinctive difference between these two individuals, there's something that you can immediately notice is their accomplishment and I guess activities and recognitions. If you look at Jane Addams, she was the face of the settlement house movement in the United States, right? She established Full House and she built the first public playground in Chicago, and she was well connected with very powerful individuals in the United States. And she was a part of Progressive Party, and she friended with President Teddy Roosevelt, and she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931, first woman to receive this type of recognition. And then she also received American Education Awards in 1935. So when it comes to lifetime achievements and recognition, I mean, Jane Addams, it's almost impossible to compare with others. She was a pioneer. She initiated a lot of first programs, social work programs in the United States, and she was a national figure. I mean, what she had accomplished is, to me, is truly remarkable. If you compare those activities and recognitions with Ada McKinley, um, it looks a little bit, I guess, modest and I guess humbling. Yes, she established Southside Settlement House, but I guess a lot of her activities mainly focus on local communities. And definitely, in my opinion, she was not a national figure. She was not that well known. She did a lot of, service to the local communities, but in terms of, recognition, we probably need to do more research to identify if she received any type of recognitions. But I doubt it. I don't think her activity was, recognized by. Maybe she was very important individuals in Southside community, but I don't think she was well-known individual beyond that community, which is really sad. But Rod and I argue that one of the main reasons why these two individuals have such a different, I guess, level or scale of accomplishments and recognition was because of the difference in their financial status. If we look at Jane Addams, she was upper class individual. Her father was, and she's from very, very rich families. Her father was Illinois senator. He was friend with Abraham Lincoln. He was the richest man in his county. So when he passed away, Jane Addams inherited a lot of wealth from her father. And in my opinion, I don't think Jane Addams' money wasn't an issue during her lifetime. I don't think Jane Addams struggled with money when she was alive. And because of her upbringing and upper class social status, she was able to connect with some of the richest, wealthy individuals in Chicago area. So she was quickly blended into this rich social circle in Chicago and leveraged her social network to support activities at Hull House, right? On the other hand, Ada McKinley, she was working or middle class individual, and her organization constantly struggled with money. Just securing a stable financial source was really, really difficult for her. She received donations from her friends, some Black politicians, and successful Black businesses. But always, those type of donations are not stable, right? So it was really difficult to, I guess, maintain providing consistent service. So for that reason, I guess she was not able to, I guess, accomplishments, many things that she wanted to accomplish in providing service to the local community. So we must understand these differences in financial standing of these two individuals and how they utilize their economic capital and social capital to provide a service to the poor and immigrants in the Chicago community. And another interesting finding, and this is one of the most ironical historical event, is that if you look at their legacy, Jane Addams Hull House Association, this is no longer in operation. It doesn't exist anymore because the organization went bankruptcy in 2012. So her legacy disappeared. I mean, it was, not well managed. And there is a Jane Addams Hull House Museum, but this is a completely different organization. This is not a Hull House that provided service. This is a museum for Jane Addams. And my understanding is this is part of the University of Illinois Chicago campus. But on the other hand, look at Ada McKinley's legacy. Ada McKinley Community Service, as I mentioned, this organization is going strong, alive and thriving. So these two organizations had a very, very different historical trajectory. Whole House at the beginning, it was shining, really nice building, and a lot of people went there to receive service, and it was, sort of a mecca for American settlement house movement. But then the prosperity of this organization gradually declined, and it doesn't exist anymore. On the other hand, Ada McKinley Community Service, it struggled all the time. It was not able to secure funding. But today we see this successful organization. So I think it's really interesting to compare these two organizations and their legacy. Since we are talking about Jane Addams, I'm going to mention a few things about her. This is because, a lot of textbooks and research on Jane Addams, at least from my field, tended to ignore a human side of Jane Addams, meaning that, nobody is perfect. Jane Addams was really accomplished a lot, but she also made some mistakes throughout her lifetime. One of them is the way she created first playground in Chicago area. Jane Addams created the Whole House Playground. It was first public playground in Chicago, okay? But the way she built this infrastructure, recreation infrastructure, was quite interesting. So right next to the Whole House, there was this land owned by William Kent. William Kent was a senator in the state of California. But a lot of people complain about the sanitary condition of these lands and buildings that Kent owned. So Kent, allowed Adams to use these facilities. Basically, he leased the lands to Jane Addams. And Kent will ask her to manage this place wisely and do something about this. So Kent was expecting, Jane Addams was do something about this, but instead of she did do something, but her approach was rather aggressive. She decided to completely destroy the building and erase everything to secure the land. She sold the land to another, person, and she was able to receive $300 or something like that. And she used that funding to create the first playground in Chicago area. And because of the destruction of the tenant houses, she, whether she likes it or not, she forced poor immigrants who occupied that building and, rendering them to, homeless. So this is a really interesting history. And Kent complained after find out. Kent complained that the method that Jane Addams took was he was really upset about Jane Addams because of her radical approach. So it's an interesting event that gives a very, different side of Jane Addams. When we think of Jane Addams, we think of her as kind, genuine, and supportive to marginalized individuals, right? But she actually forced these people homeless, evicted these individuals from their home and created this new playground in Chicago area, which is a very contrasting picture of what we know as Jane Addams. And another interesting event that I would like to share with you is there was a case study on the exchange between Addams and Ida B. Wells regarding racial justice and lynching. So Ida B. Wells is well-known African-American journalist and civil rights activist. And they had these, communication back and forth arguments and, opinion exchanges regarding lynching and racial justice in the United States. And according to, this case study analyzing these exchanges, and it was clear that Jane Addams was, very naive about the racial relationship in the United States. She criticized violence and lynching, and she said this is unacceptable, very inhumane, this is horrible. But why do we have lynching? I guess this is because of the criminal activity of the Black people. So her argument is really reinforcing this racial stereotype of Black criminality and inferiority. And so Ida B. Wells had to correct Jane Addams and say, no, 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 you are you are not understanding this. You have a huge misunderstanding. That's not the case. You know, this is because of racial stereotype and racial injustice in this country. So, you know, Jane Addams did a lot of work for racial justice. I mean, she was a founding member of WACP. She was an advocate of racial, justice in the United States. But throughout her life, she made this type of, mistakes and errors. So by looking at these historical events and everything, this is sort of a conclusion that I made in our publication. Quote, collectively, these findings portray McKinley as a humble warfare worker who emerged from the mess, whereas Adams was a wealthy social reformer who came down from the noble class. So he has a very different orientation. And I'm not here to criticize Adams. That's not my intention, to be clear. Adams she did amazing job. She accomplished a lot, and her service needs to be respected and well recognized. But if somebody asks me if I like McKinley or Adams, my answer will be probably I like McKinley more because I'm not a rich person, and I really appreciate the fact that McKinley was one of us. She dedicated herself to support all of us, ordinary people, and she didn't stop despite of a lot of financial difficulties and challenges. She never stopped, until she passed away. So I think her lifetime commitment and dedication to the Southside community is truly remarkable and exceptional. And so for that reason, I think American publics need to have more understanding of her, and more recognitions are in order. So finally, I'm going to briefly talk about future directions, what type of research needs to be done, and where do we go from here. I guess first of all, I think we need to conduct more research on Ada McKinley. Dr. Deezer and I agree that we probably just scratched the tip of the iceberg. And I think more information needed to be discovered. And I think her activities and service provided by the settlement house, Southside Settlement House, needs to be better understood. In fact, there are some conflicting information from the existing, resources in terms of Ada McKinley's biographical information, and that needs to be checked out too. So that's one area of research that Dr. Deezer and I would like to aggressively pursue. The second line of research, I think we need to conduct more research on other settlement houses managed by or served primarily by people of color. Southside Settlement House was not the only settlement house managed by African Americans. And according to the existing resources, there are several other, settlement houses managed by Blacks and served Blacks. And one of the reasons why we have those type of Black settlement houses was because the mainstream settlement houses failed to recognize the need of people of color, and it didn't provide proper service. And in fact, a lot of white social reformers who served in the settlement houses had a very strong racial biases at that time. So I think we need to do more investigation on Black settlement houses. And this is a very important and much needed research, in my opinion. One of my favorite quotes is that history is always written by the power. So we must ask ourselves, whose story have we learned or maybe we are teaching to our next generation? And I think the existing, at least from my field, existing information on settlement houses dominated by white history's perspective, white Americans' perspective. I think it's important to provide more nuanced understanding and highlight how many others contribute to the progress of American society. And finally, and I think it's time for the city of Chicago to create a street or park named after Ada McKinley, or create a monument to recognize her significant contribution to the local community. The idea was first mentioned by Jamal Malone Yeah, Mr. Malone is the CEO of the Ada McKinley Community Service currently, and I strongly support this idea. In Chicago area, there are two parks named after Jane Addams, but nothing other than Ada McKinley Community Service. You know, there's no street, there's no park, no monuments recognizing Ada McKinley. There is McKinley Park, but that has nothing to do with Ada McKinley. It was for Bill McKinley, president, who was assassinated. And given her lifetime commitment to the Southside community and her devotion to the marginalized community, I think, you know, this type of recognition is well overdue. I think it's time. You know, since last year, United States, we have witnessed that a lot of monuments of Confederate armies and, you know, generals are removed, right? Yeah, it's important to, you know, I guess, provide more just perspective in our history. And I like the fact that, you know, these, you know, monuments are removed because they symbolize South's resistance to the Union, right? But what about afterwards? So removal of those things, I don't think that's not, I don't think that's enough. I think we also need to highlight and celebrate the other side of the history. So I think it's time for the city of Chicago to work on this. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you see my contact information there. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And I would like to welcome any comments or questions.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lee, first and foremost, for the presentation. That's such a wonderful history of Ada McKinley, and there's so much, you know, like you said, you've only scratched the surface of her life and her legacy. And so I think as young social workers, many of us who are in this room, it's an exciting thing to have that prospect of diving deeper into not only her, but other settlement houses, like you said, run by persons of color. And so thank you so much for bringing this to our school specifically.
If I may, thank you so much for having me. This is truly an honor for me because, you know, I mentioned that there are very limited available information on Ada McKinley. One of them was actually a master's degree thesis published by a student from social work department at Loyola University in Chicago. So to me, this is truly an honor to share this research activity with the audience and event organized by Loyola University. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad that, you know, it's so awesome that our school, someone at our school was able to be part of that journey that took you to your ultimate research. And so it's really exciting to have you here with us. Also, just as a reflection point, I feel like there's so many parallels drawn between the moment we're living in right now and her personal history with, you know, losing children to a pandemic. I mean, that's really relevant for so many people. And then we see, you know, the race riots, and we're living through this time of racial justice and the fight for racial equity. And so, you know, this story just feels really relevant to the moment that we're living in right now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to drop those in the chat for Dr. Lee. I had a couple questions that I wrote down beforehand. One was just, how can young people continue the important work of sharing the stories of women and BIPOC professionals who touch so many lives, but are not mentioned in our history books? What are some of the steps that we can take?
Wow, that's a really good question. That's a really good question, but I was not prepared for that. I didn't expect that question to be coming from the audience. But I'm glad that you asked that questions because, you know, if we don't think about those questions, then we are not making a positive change in our society, right? So my answer to you or anybody who asked that question will be education. Educate yourself again, it's very difficult because the existing information, a lot of American history is written by white Americans' perspective. Again, history is written by the power, okay? I'm not trying to blame white Americans at all. I teach diversity and inclusion class in my department. Whenever I talk about this concept of white privilege, white racism, systemic racism, some white students become very defensive about it, as if they are accused of something that they didn't do. Okay, but we need to understand that that's not our intention. Our intention is to better understand our past and truly engage in meaningful and constructive dialogue for the better future, right? So to do so, I think it's extremely, extremely important to educate ourselves. It could be difficult because existing resources and knowledge is sometimes whitewashed. But if you pay attention and look out for some informations, there are many different informations and books and articles available out there. So it's truly important that we educate ourselves and so that we are prepared to be engaged in an open and inclusive discussion, and then which leads to positive social change. So I hope that addressed your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, again, speaking to the moment that we're in, I think a lot has come about of the role of education, reading, just, reading from authors of color, getting that different perspective from your own has been so pertinent in this current time. So thank you. We have a question from my dear friend Elizabeth. What role did gender play in the settlement house movement and for Ada McKinley specifically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think Dr. Diza will be probably the best person to address that question because he has more knowledge in settlement house movement in general. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer the question because my angle was race and ethnicity for this particular publication. So I wasn't particularly paying attention to gender issues. But I know from my earlier education that a lot of these settlement houses were managed and controlled by female social reformers, right? And then one of the primary activities they advocated for is to expanding the right of vote, women's voting, right? Because until 1920s, women didn't have the right to vote, and I mean each state has different voting regulations for female specifically. But when I think about this is so, I mean, maybe it's because I'm living in a different era right now, but it's just inconceivable that you simply don't have the right to vote simply because you are a woman. So so to summarize, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. Sorry, Elizabeth. I wish I can, maybe I can call up Rod, Dr. Deezer, and say, hey, Rod, can you address this question? But yeah.
Maybe we'll just have to have another conversation with both of you next time.
Oh, I'm in.
Awesome. So we have another question here from my sister, actually, who's on this too. Is there any information available on how Ada S. McKinley navigated the racial dynamics of the South Side, especially as the population shifted and changed from a lot of racist policies or dynamics?
Great question. And to simply address this question, I don't have enough information on that. And in fact, that's one of our key interests for future study. Again, we are just to begin this research, and we just accumulated enough information to provide who she was and what type of activities she did. So I think it's really important to continue this research, and especially looking at the way she managed this, racial tensions. And she was a strong, racial justice advocate. So I'm sure she did a lot of work on this area. But I'm sorry to tell you that because of my lack of information and lack of research in this particular area, more work needs to be done, and I can't provide enough answer to that question.
She said, really looking forward to seeing the next phase of you.
Yeah,
I feel like
thank
this
you
is a
so
lot
much.
of like to be continued, maybe in
Yeah,
in
to be
a couple of
continued.
years.
Maybe one of you can do it. You know, I'm planning to apply for research grants, and maybe you graduate and become a, I can hire you as a research assistant. So, I'm serious about this because I'm currently contemplating work with the social department, social work department in my university and create some kind of interdisciplinary master's program or PhD program that focusing on this particular project. So.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Looks like we have another question here from a fellow Loyola student. What are some of the leisure activities that Ada S. McKinley introduced into her settlement house programs?
Yeah, so according to the existing information, she provided a lot of physical exercise and events, festivals. And by doing so, I think participants can involve in, I guess, coordination process, right? And then execution process of the event management, which is really important in terms of figuring out logistics and things like that. So I think she effectively utilized this visual opportunity, such as physical activities, events, and festivals, picnic gatherings, and things like that, to really build a lot of problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills for the participants.
That's great. Seems like a lot of community-based, which is in the name of her now, Ada S. McKinley, community-based services. So really drawing on this community around to bring people together. And then just one final question before we conclude here. So what has your research on Ada McKinley meant to you thus far, and your the personal impact for you?
Wow. Okay. I'm glad that you asked that question because she is like, I guess, the person that I admire very much. So if I go to my office, her picture will be there. Her picture is there on the wall, right? Because her dedication, she didn't have a lot of money. She was not coming from a rich family. And she was always in struggle. But her priority was not herself. Her priority was always the well-being of others. To me, that type of humanitarian values and altruism, this is so remarkable that we all need to, respect. So I have a lot of respect to her. And once this pandemic is over, I'm really looking forward to visit Chicago area, and I want to visit her, graves, and pay my due because she inspired me so much, and she taught me how to appreciate what I have currently, and she taught me how to be an advocate for marginalized individuals. So as a human being, I have a whole lot of respect towards her. So I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but to me, she is one of my role models.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer. And I think a lot of us from this presentation have start to feel a similar feeling to yourself. So thank you so much again. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth just to conclude.
I just put the information or the website link for the Ada S. McKinley Community Center. And here we go. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight. This is one of many events that we have this month. It is Social Worker Month, which is what partially inspired this presentation. It's also Women's History Month, so this was a great way to begin this month. This Friday, we have a student field experience panel, so you'll get to hear from some students who have gone through 2 internship experiences, learn some tips and tricks, and just also lessons learned. Don't make the same mistakes that we did. Make sure you also follow our social media. We'll always be posting more about other events that are in the future. There we go. Our next two events, we have an alumni speak for schools and for the health specialization. So these are two distinct events. So if you are considering or you are in the schools or health specialization, we'd love to have you at these events. We'll have alumni sort of talking about what the real world experience is like post-graduation after you walked out of Loyola or U of Chicago or UIC or wherever with that degree in schools or health. So it should be a really great experience. And lastly, NASW is having a virtual advocacy day. So make sure you sign up. Would love to see you there. So yeah. Thank you all. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.